The story begins with humanity on the brink of total destruction. The evil god Windrake suddenly appeared, leading a countless horde of monsters. Chaos and death fell upon this land. The monsters ran to fight with weapons at the ready, the earth shook under their feet. However, there was still hope for the people. 5 of the strongest magicians challenged the evil god. The main character, Setsuna, directed magic from his hand into many monsters. Evil monsters of different races rushed towards the magicians. One of them commanded the others to get ready. The enraged magicians directed all their power towards the monsters. Setsuna put his hand forward and angrily called out to the evil god Windrake. He approached him and heard that this was where his end would come. The magician began his chant for everyone to unite the 6 magical attributes and attack at the same time. A powerful explosion of the elements was directed towards the god Windrake. One of the magicians ordered to help their leader Setsuna. All the magicians simultaneously pierced the god Windrake with their beams. The magicians with beads of sweat on their surprised faces wondered if they succeeded. A cloud of smoke covered the ground around, from which a living god was visible. He rose up, menacingly looking at the magicians, who thought with surprise that this was impossible. One of them says that this is not the end, ordering to attack more powerfully. Setsuna asks his comrades to wait, saying that they need to take a closer look. All the magicians again directed their beams towards Windrake, who stepped back a little and did not get hit. Setsuna thought, did he dispel the magic? The formidable Windrake, turning to the magicians, asks, is this all that they people are capable of? Looking at the mages standing in fighting stances, God says that they are pathetic insects that should just rot in his garden, because they are pathetic, stupid creatures. One of the mages with a frightened face said that it cannot be that their magic does not work on him. Her partner asks Setsuna what he will order them to do. He, with an irritated face, cries out that this cannot be, thinking that there must be something that they can still oppose him. One of the mages is thrown aside by the blow, the rest of them look at him in horror. They are surrounded by a horde of many monsters. The mages seeing this stood in fighting stances, ready to fight back. One of the mages turning to Setsuna says that she is running out of mana. She asks him for help, being captured by a monster, while the second asks the snake attacking her not to come closer. A moment later the girl is swallowed by a snake-like monster, from whose mouth only her legs are sticking out. Setsuna, looking at this in horror, orders the monsters to stop, extracting magic from his hands with all his strength. Sneaking up from behind, God swings towards him with the intention of striking. Bloody Setsuna falls to the ground sobbing, having received a blow. He rises heavily to his knees holding his wounded hand. Drops of blood flow from his mouth and he looks forward in horror, seeing in front of him a destroyed city and fallen comrades. Raising his fist with the last of his strength, he furiously hits the ground, wondering, is this the end of humanity? The huge god Windrake appears behind him and addresses the magician saying that this is a futile fight. Setsuna with rage in his eyes turned his head to God, consoling himself that this is not all. He rises from the ground, putting the last of his strength into the blow, swings at Windrake. His attack would have hit the god right in the chest, but he blocked the blow by crossing his arms. Blue blood flowed from the forearm of the enraged god where the blow landed. Setsuna looked at his fist, wondering what worked. He couldn't believe how such a low-level attack could work on him. Setsuna looked at his fist and realized that he could be defeated with this, but unfortunately, he realized it too late. The god looked at Setsuna with obvious mockery, asking, what is this all he can do, a pathetic insect? The mage backed away and saw that the necklace on his chest began to sparkle. He continued to look at it in surprise, remembering that he received it from the headmaster. Little Setsuna holds the necklace in his hands and asks the headmaster sitting next to him, this is the necklace of rebirth, isn't it? In a calm tone, the grown man with white long hair and a beard answered him approvingly. Along the way, the director added that this necklace carries the power of the spirit of time and Setsuna will have the opportunity to correct his past mistakes, but only once. Mistakes, Setsuna said with a smile, he did not need it before. Turning to the director, he asked, do not you think that this is unnecessary? With a smile on his face, the director said, as expected from the best student of his academy. However, he is sure that in the future it will definitely be useful to Setsuna. Putting his hand on his shoulder, the director said. Returning from his thoughts about the past, Setsuna realized that this is the very moment. His mistake was that he did not choose that magic that time. Grabbing the amulet emitting enormous energy, he said that this time victory will definitely be his. With the help of the necklace of revival, Setsuna teleported back in time. Setsuna found himself in a bright building, surrounded by people dressed in the same uniform as him. Covering his face with his hand from the blinding sun, he raised his head. Behind Setsuna sat a guy with a smirk on his face. He hit him on the back with his hand and said that he should stop messing around, because he is next. Surprised, Setsuna turned to the guy and asked, "His name is Leo?" As far as he remembered, Leo went missing even before the appearance of the evil god. Setsuna looked around and realized that he was in the building of the Magic Academy, where he was 10 years ago. Sitting in the room with complete confidence, he clenched his hand into a fist and said to himself that this time he will not allow himself to be defeated again, and will do everything to defeat the evil god. Leo put his hand on Setsuna's shoulder and reminded him that now it was his turn, because they came for the blessing ceremony. Setsuna confidently walked towards the director and the men standing next to him. The girls sitting in the hall whispered about him, asking each other, "Isn't he the greatest genius in the history of the academy?" One of them heard that he has an affinity with all the magical paths. A stately man with a beard opened a book and magic illuminated the academy, while Setsuna stood next to him, covering his eyes with his hand from the whirlwind of magic. There are many different paths in magic. In order to activate magic, a certain technique is required. Therefore, at a certain point, you must choose your magical path. This makes the process of learning magic from another path difficult. Similar to how a person worships several gods at the same time. The man with the book formally addressed Setsuna Cromwell, saying that he can now choose the path to follow. He asked with confidence, of course Setsuna's choice would be exactly this, right? The protagonist thought that long-range magic in a normal situation would be the right choice. Create an element from mana, then aim at the chosen target, and with a low risk of being attacked in return, long-range magic is usually enough to defeat the enemy. Setsuna became the strongest wielder of long-range magic, but it was absolutely useless against an evil god, the boy remembered. He hesitantly turned his head to the sheet with the orange seal. Everyone around him stared at Setsuna in fear and bewilderment. Leo asked in surprise, "What is he doing?" He was going to choose long-range magic this morning. Out of all the variety, he decided to choose close-range magic. It is the worst of all, right? Pointing his finger upward, the man with the book in his hand addresses Setsuna and says that this path is only aimed at strengthening the body. It can only attack the enemy who is close. This path is considered forgotten. In fact, this is the same as going into battle against archers armed with only a stone axe. He asked him, would he really just give up on his future? Setsuna lowered his head and thought that he already knew everything. A mage with such a magical path is considered hopeless. However, against the evil god Windrake, this is the only path that can defeat him, Setsuna said to himself, remembering the mountains of corpses that the merciless god left behind. Setsuna confidently looked at the sheet in which the melee magic was sealed. Everyone around him, not believing that he would do this, looked at him. Setsuna extended his wrist to the seal and touched it. An orange aura began to appear around his hand. At that moment he thought, I will choose him and knock all the evil out of this god. A melee mage is going to shake the whole world alone. Setsuna looked at his wrist, and it was an imprint of melee magic that emitted steam. He clenched his fist with confidence. The other mages looked at Setsuna with puzzled expressions. The bearded man slammed the book shut, looking annoyed, saying that he intended to entrust him with all his knowledge if he chose ranged magic. Cyrus Arclight, the leader of the long-range magic corps, exclaimed that Setsuna would have become the strongest mage, and that fame would not have passed by even his mentor, but still. Setsuna wondered if it was because of the fame, right? He thought about how such things would lose all meaning in 10 years. There were only 10 years left until the complete defeat of humanity, and 5 years until the appearance of the evil god, Setsuna thought. As he walked down the steps, he thought that although he had knowledge from his previous life, he had almost no experience in using close combat magic. His only question was how he could develop this magic before the evil god invaded their world. All the second-year students who had completed all the necessary rites were asked to go to their classrooms. Setsuna, in the crowd of mages, wondered where the close combat mage corps was. He looked around the crowd for Leo, but he couldn't find him. Setsuna decided to approach a guy who was standing nearby to ask for directions, but the guy jumped back, saying that classes were about to start. Setsuna was left standing surrounded by the crowd, completely confused. The guys around him were whispering that he was finished, having chosen this direction just to stand out. Setsuna remembered how different this was from his past life. He started to tie the belts himself, remembering that there should be a map of the entire campus in the courtyard. Walking down the street, the mage heard an unknown person scream. he was screaming about a fireball. Setsuna wondered how a duel could take place in such a place. A girl with bright red hair was sliding along the ground where the fireball had hit. Barely standing on her feet, she screamed at the unknown person, asking him to return something. With anger in her eyes, the girl screamed that her mother had bought her this brooch. The man held a green brooch in his hands and asked, "Isn't this brooch a magic tool for accumulating mana?" Another of the guys who took the girl's brooch added that it was too good a thing for a commoner like her, but they would find a better use for it. Setsuna, watching this, understood that she was clearly also a melee mage, and these three were from the long-range path. The guy in whose hands the fire was blazing shouted furiously that if she wanted to return it, she should take it by force. Shouting that the girl's melee magic was useless, he threw a fireball with all his fury. The ball flew to her feet, but the girl managed to dodge. The basis of any melee magic has always been physical enhancement. It enhances her physical abilities. But even if you manage to avoid a direct attack, you still won't be able to break the distance. The girl, full of determination, pointed her hand towards the boys, saying that her mother had been saving up for years to buy this brooch to give to the girl, and she wasn't going to give it to idiots like them. A blue sword appeared from her hands. Setsuna watched this fight with an interested look and thought that it was a mana sword. The boys looked at the girl with the sword and said that it wouldn't help her. "I wonder if this blade will even reach her," one of the boys said, swinging his magic at the girl. The ranged mage's attack struck her, and the girl fell to the ground. How pathetic she is! No matter how hard she tries, she still won't be able to reach the ranged mage, the boy said with an evil grin on his face, conjuring a fireball in his hand. The boy threw his magic, saying along the way that she will probably spend the rest of her life like this, never receiving anything like this again. A red-haired girl lies on the ground watching 3 fireballs fly at her. Setsuna pushes off the ground, runs through 3 ranged mages. He picks up the frightened girl in his arms, saving her from being hit. The guys look at what is happening with anger, and are surprised by this. Setsuna asks the girl if she knows where the melee mage core is. It would be nice if someone could lead him. One of the guys points his finger at him and asks if this guy is Setsuna Cromwell. Wait, just look at the back of his palm, he is a melee mage. One of the guys with an evil grin on his face asks if he is serious right now. He creates flames in his hand and says that since he is a melee mage, they should beat him up real good. Setsuna says that melee magic is really weak, however. He doesn't finish the sentence and thinks that it depends on how he uses it. While he was watching, he noticed some things that could be improved. Setsuna raises his right hand and says that the path he takes doesn't necessarily determine the outcome of a fight. The red-haired girl tells him with a worried look that he should wait because they are upperclassmen, and they will beat him. One of the mages releases several fireballs and says that it is too late. Setsuna's legs are covered in a blue aura and he thinks that by concentrating magic in his legs, he can strengthen them. He runs very fast, dodging all the fireballs. Setsuna continues to run and thinks that with this speed, he can easily dodge their attacks. And since he can move so freely, he can do more. Setsuna says that all he does is shoot fireballs. Is that all he can do? The ranged mage casting fireballs says that he should shut up. At the same time, he wonders what's wrong with his movements. He can't hit him at all. The furious mage casting a fireball says that he's not going to joke around with him. Immediately after, he releases a very powerful stream of magic from his hands. Setsuna, with a calm face, creates an energy sword in his hand. He strikes the spell and dispels it. The frightened ranged mage asks how he was able to dispel his magic. The red-haired girl, looking surprised, asks loudly, "Can this be cut?" Setsuna says that when magic hits magic, the one with the higher magic skills wins. He thinks that the reason why he, who did not have particularly high magic power, became the strongest in the world is because he controls his magic power very precisely. This ability turned out to be more useful than he expected, and if he combines this power with speed, something will happen. One of the attacking guys says that since it has come to this, he will create something huge. The other 2 guys tell him that it is too dangerous, and if they go that far, the instructors will immediately come running here. The furious ranged mage orders them to shut up. He starts to mumble something unintelligible and Setsuna runs towards him very quickly. The ranged mage is surprised by his speed and thinks that this is impossible. He looks at his opponent and wonders how he got so close. Setsuna channels energy into his fist, with the intention of striking. He uses the skill Fist of Magic and punches him in the stomach. The people standing nearby watch in shock. Setsuna calmly looks at the defeated opponent, who is lying on the ground. He, looking at his fist, thinks that as long as the enemy is within reach, he can fight without problems, even using close combat magic. The fallen mage's friend looks at him with a frightened expression, wondering if melee magic is considered the weakest? He only used this, so where did he get so much power from? Setsuna holds out her hand and asks if they forgot anything? The boy looks upset, gives him back the brooch, and thinks that he will have to obey. The two boys pick up their fallen friend and carry him away. Setsuna turns to the girl, showing her brooch. He gives it to her and asks if this is a very important thing to her, right? The girl clutches the brooch in her hands and thanks him with a happy smile. She puts the brooch in her pocket and says that she forgot to introduce herself. She happily holds out her hand to him and says that her name is Layla Roseville. Setsuna holds out her hand in return and tells her name. She says that she has heard of him, because he is a guy who has an affinity with all the magical paths. Why would such a person choose melee magic? Setsuna thinks that it is to defeat the evil god, but if he says that, maybe no one will believe him. He asks if she could show him the way to the melee magic faculty building? The girl asks with a worried face, the orientation hour should have started already, right? He says that they should hurry. After that, they walk down the road together. Setsuna thinks, so the building is on the outskirts of the entire campus? No wonder, since melee magic is not popular. Layla turns to him and says that he should teach her how to create that magic blade he showed her earlier. Setsuna says that there was nothing wrong with that, it just depends on her level of mana control. Setsuna thinks that it is true, melee magic can be used in different ways depending on the circumstances. If he can fully master close combat magic, he will be able to fully resist the evil god's magic dispel. In order to gain another advantage against the evil god, Setsuna goes back to a memory where he is sitting on a red sofa and looks at the principal who put down a cup of tea. The principal takes off his gloves with a thoughtful look and throws them on the table. Setsuna looks forward in fear and sees the principal's wrists, which have magic imprints on them. Setsuna says loudly that this is impossible. He has marks of two completely different paths. He thinks that a person can only choose one of the paths. He has summoning magic in his right hand, but Setsuna has never seen the mark on his left hand. Setsuna asks the principal what kind of mark it is. The principal puts on his gloves and says that he will tell him when the time comes. He only told him about it because it is Setsuna. In the end, he still has not explained anything to him. The principal was killed almost immediately after the evil god appeared. Setsuna also sensed the danger of the principal's second magical path. He absolutely must learn the secret to change fate. Currently, Layla pointed her finger at the gate, saying that there was something there. Setsuna walked forward and thought that the problem was that he had no idea how to gain the principal's recognition in his current state. They approached the gate and saw a gloomy man. The disgruntled man turned to Setsuna, gritting his teeth and saying that it was nice to see him leisurely strolling with the girls instead of studying. Layla stepped forward and was about to say something, but the man interrupted her and said that he did not want to hear their excuses. He looked at Setsuna with an angry expression and loudly said that no matter what his previous merits were, he was worthless in this place. The man approached Setsuna and pointed his index finger at his chest and said that now that he had entered the faculty of melee magicians, he had become trash. Setsuna removed the man's hand and said that these were very rude words. After all, he had now become their professor. Was he really not proud of the melee magic that he taught? The professor looked at Setsuna angrily and asked if he was really interested in this. The professor grabbed him by the clothes, loudly asking how dare he talk to him like that. Setsuna looked at him with incomprehension and said that there were still untapped possibilities in melee magic. He believed in it. The professor thought that Setsuna was an impudent boy and how he wanted to break his cocky nose. The professor let him go with a displeased look and said that Setsuna was talkative. The professor reaches out to one of the rocks the other students are training on and tells Setsuna to show him how. The green-haired guy with glasses crosses his arms above his head and swings his arm angrily. A stream of magic comes out of his hands and hits the rock. He wipes the sweat off his face and says that there is no reaction. Setsuna asks what it is. The professor says that it is the first test needed to determine his rank in the class. There is a crystal inside this black steel rock and they need to extract it as quickly as possible. The professor turns to them with a smile on his face and says that the losers will be punished. The professor points his finger at the girl and angrily says that it has been an hour and none of them have achieved anything. The green-haired guy leans on the rock and says that they can say whatever they want but this rock is really hard. The girl next to him scratched the back of her head and asked how she could even break this stone with the magic she had at the moment. One unknown guy wiped sweat from his face and said that he was sure that the professor was so angry only because he was not given a promotion. The second guy put his index finger to his lips and said to be quiet, because he could hear him. The professor, behind whom Setsuna was standing, extended his hand to the stone and said that they had another free stone. He placed his palm on the stone and said that it was time for Setsuna to show him what close combat magic was capable of. He would only have 10 minutes. Layla asked with fear on her face, "They only have 10 minutes? It is impossible to break the black steel stone in just 10 minutes. And don't you think that this stone is bigger than the others?" The professor with an evil grin on his face asked, "So what?" However, while they were arguing, they only had 9 minutes left. Setsuna put his hand on Layla's shoulder, confidently heading towards the stone. The professor, clutching his watch in his hand, mockingly asked that Setsuna had lost his speech. If he bowed before him and apologized, then maybe he would give him a little more time. Did Setsuna understand? Setsuna confidently said that he did not need it. 10 seconds would be enough for him. The professor, with anger on his face, asked what he had just said. Layla, frightened, told Setsuna that he was acting recklessly. The professor thought that they were stupid, because this block of black steel was not only large, but also had the greatest density. Even he was able to break something like this in only 30 minutes. The professor asked Setsuna if he understood that he would not give him a second chance. He said 10 seconds, so let him do it. Setsuna humbly swung his hand from which blue magic emanated and said that he would show him. Setsuna thought that in order to earn the principal's recognition, he would need to at least become the best in this class. A magic sword appeared from his hand. He swung it and thought that he couldn't let such a trifle prevent him from achieving his goal. Setsuna's attack hit the stone, leaving only a dent on it. The professor, pleased with himself, said loudly that he thought so. Setsuna was only good at talking. What punishment should he come up with for disobeying his teacher? The stone began to crack with a crack, its remains began to fly apart. The surprised professor does not understand how this could have happened. Setsuna holds out the crystal extracted from the stone to him. He reminded him that he did it in just 10 seconds. Layla, raising her palms to her mouth, said that he really did it. The students around are puzzled, how Setsuna managed to split such a huge boulder. And they wonder if he is perhaps stronger than the professor? The puzzled professor said furiously that he would never admit it. Setsuna definitely cheated. This stone was so hard that no one could destroy it even in 10 minutes. The professor pointed his finger at Setsuna and asked how he did it in 10 seconds. It was obvious that something was definitely fishy. Setsuna asked how such a stone could take 10 minutes? If so, maybe he should change his profession from professor and become a student again. The professor swung his fist and loudly said that Setsuna was a damned boy. A man with a lion tattoo on his shoulder approached the professor from behind and called out to Zachary. The man grabbed the professor by the head with his hand and asked why he was bullying the students again. Zachary loudly asked if that was the head professor Yahello. He stretched his neck with his hand and yawned, saying that they woke him up, and this guy definitely did not cheat. He simply read the flow of mana inside the stone. After striking the weakest spot, Yahello, smoking a cigarette, looked at Zachary with contempt, asking why he was trying to act like a professor without even understanding such obvious things. Yahello loudly asked the students for attention. Professor Zachary was going to demonstrate to them how to defend themselves with mana. Yahello took a fighting stance. His body was enveloped in blue magic, and he said that if Zachary was training, he would definitely not die from something like this. The professor stretched his hands forward in fear and loudly said that he was to blame, asking him to wait. He would not do this again. Yahello strikes Zachary. The professor blocked the blow with a magical barrier and flew into the wall. Setsuna wondered that even after he broke through the barrier, what was wrong with his power level? Not at all like the others. Who is he? Yahello looked at Setsuna and asked with a cheerful face, "His name is Setsuna or something like that, right?" Yahello said that he is not bad, clapping Setsuna on the back. "Not bad for a beginner in close combat magic, keep trying hard." Setsuna looked at Yahello with a serious expression and said that just because he is a close combat magician, it does not mean that he is inferior to the others. He will become the strongest by using the power of close combat to his advantage. Yahello pointed his finger at Setsuna and said loudly that this is the right attitude. If he wants to learn something, he can ask him. Yahello thought that there is another idiot in the world who thinks the same way as him. Yahello guesses that the others have already made their choice to participate in the competition. But now it seems that an unexpected dark horse has appeared. Lionel asked to let him introduce himself properly. He is Lionel, the head professor here. He puts his hands on his hips and says that he is glad to see everyone at the Faculty of Close Combat Magic. He hates to tell them this, but they need to choose a representative to participate in the exchange competition. Setsuna remembers that the house competition is a major event where the 8 magic houses compete for honor and prestige. One representative is chosen from each house, and the winner is determined in a tournament format. Before his regression, he won the competition as the representative of the long-range house and earned the headmaster's recognition. He can't pass up an opportunity like this. Setsuna puts his hands in his pockets and lowers his head, wondering, what is this fragment of the black stone? Lionel looks at the crowd of students and says that Setsuna is not the only one who passed this test. Before they came here, someone had already extracted the crystal. What's more, he did it with only his fists. Setsuna looks away and wonders, what are these fragments at their feet coming from? His gaze fell on a man surrounded by a magical aura who was sitting in the corner. Setsuna calls out to Drago Okard and tells him to come closer. He walks up to him with his hands in his pockets and asks if he is Setsuna Cromwell. Why did he choose the path of melee magic when he could have chosen any other path? Setsuna says with a displeased look that there are things he can only achieve with melee magic. Drago tells Setsuna to shut up and asks if he is going to achieve anything with such a weak body. For generations, his family has only excelled in melee magic. He has also spent 17 years training this body for this purpose. Drago throws an incredibly fast punch near Setsuna's head, who stands there with an unwavering look. The powerful punch causes a wind to rise, surprising the students standing nearby. Drago stands in the same pose he finished his blow and says that Setsuna needs to fight him. He won't let a man who became a melee mage just for fun become his representative. The main character thought that he had already heard about Drago. He remembered this name from the competition in his past life. The only known person from the entire melee faculty. Setsuna smiled and said that he and Drago should fight. Lionel approached the mages, put his hands on their shoulders and said that he was glad because they came to an understanding. Then the fight will take place in a week. Drago turned around, starting to leave. He told Setsuna not to think about running away during this week. Did he understand? If he really is a melee mage, then he must fight for his own to the death. The confused students asked each other who would win this battle. The unknown girl with a calm face said that no matter how talented he is, he still can't defeat Drago. Layla looked at Setsuna with a worried expression and asked if he could win. Setsuna closed his eyes with a calm expression and said that he couldn't. Because of Drago's trained physique, he wouldn't be able to compete with him in his current state. Setsuna put his hands in his pockets and headed towards the gate, and said that he had a secret plan. Layla followed him and asked where he was going. They came to a road in the middle of the forest. Layla looked ahead in surprise. She and Setsuna approached a huge tree. Layla wondered where they were. Setsuna looked at her, and put his hand on the tree and said that this was a secret training place that only he knew about. Setsuna was covered in a green aura and said that it was here that he would become 3 times stronger. What a huge tree! It must be that sacred tree that was over 1,000 years old. Setsuna reaches out to the tree and thinks that this time he will be recognized again. Layla looks up at the tree in confusion and asks what kind of light is coming from it. Setsuna, remaining in the same position, says that this is the blessing of the sacred tree. The tree grants an aura only to those it has recognized. With this sacred attribute, he will be able to restore his own mana. At the same time, Setsuna thinks that he found this place long before his regression. Setsuna comes out of his thoughts and says that as long as he is here, he will not need to worry about his mana running out. Setsuna happily looks at his fist, from which a green aura is emitted, and loudly says that he can train here until he reaches the limit. Layla, crossing her arms over her chest, thinks with apprehension that Drago is a natural-born melee mage. Setsuna helped her return the brooch. Now it is her turn to help him. Setsuna looked at Layla leaving in bewilderment. Sometime later in the training room of the Faculty of Close Combat Magic, Layla watches the guys practicing in the training room. She turned her head to the side and thought in surprise, how is this possible? Drago was lifting a heavy barbell at great speed. He put the barbell down and turned to Lionel. Drago, with beads of sweat running down his face, asks that there could still be black steel stones in the yard? Lionel asked in confusion, is he really going to destroy them all? Drago, walking to the exit, says that he is not going to destroy them. He took 5 stones, put them on his back and began to do push-ups, saying that he just wants to borrow them. Layla watches this in horror and thinks that Drago is able to kill a person with one blow. She runs wondering if everything will be okay. Meanwhile, Setsuna is sitting by a tree and reading a book on martial arts. Layla loudly addresses Setsuna and says that he doesn't have time to relax. She tells Setsuna that she saw Drago doing push-ups using 5 black rocks as weights. Setsuna calmly says that he expected Drago to train like this. He, with his eyes filled with a blue aura, says that there is no need to worry, because this is part of his plan. Layla looks at Setsuna and asks what he means. He flips through the book and says that physical enhancement is essentially strengthening and controlling the nervous system with mana. If he wants to strengthen his legs, then he just needs to concentrate mana in them. If he wants to improve his memory, then he just needs to concentrate mana in his head. He throws the martial arts book into a pile of other books. Setsuna moves forward and says that after he learns all the techniques, he will need to put them into practice. Layla looks at Setsuna with delight and loudly says that she has never heard of such a method. Rubbing his face with his hand, Setsuna says that this is not all. He leans on one arm and falls to the ground with a thud. Layla sees a huge number of terrible wounds on Setsuna's arm. He sighs heavily and rises to his feet, enveloped in a green aura, and says that he is straining his body to the limit with such physical exertion. Now he needs to focus on accelerating the healing of his body so that he can become stronger in the shortest possible time. Layla says with fear that he should not exhaust himself so much, because there are other ways to achieve what he wants. He says sadly that it will not work any other way. Setsuna looks at his clenched fist with determination and says that he will not be able to keep up with Drago with only half measures, because he has trained in close combat magic for years. Over the next week, Setsuna will have to repeat the process of destruction and healing at least 1,000 times. Layla opened her mouth, afraid that just one time led to such consequences. Setsuna immerses himself in memories and thinks that this is not entirely true. He remembered the orphanage. At that time he could not use any magic. Little Setsuna holds a book in his hand and stubbornly points his palm at the stone. He spent time training every day. Steam comes from a small round stone, which suddenly flies in different directions. Setsuna looked at his hand with an unlucky look. He failed many times, but still continued to try. Setsuna looks at the stone with a satisfied smile, which rose slightly into the air. Even despite the slow progress, he still got better step by step. At present, Setsuna with a calm smile on his face says that there is nothing to worry about. This allows him to become stronger. He begins training with Layla. They do the same exercises. She finished training and sighed from fatigue, thinking at the same time about what she was told, that Setsuna only had his talent. Setsuna does push-ups with 5 rocks tied to his back. He does the 10th push-up with a tired look. Layla watches what is happening with a smile and thinks that Setsuna is trying much harder than any of them. After some time, the day of the battle arrived. Drago and Setsuna are standing on the battlefield. Spectators are sitting on the benches, ready to watch what is happening. Drago, with an unpleasantly surprised face, says that it means he did not run away. Setsuna, with a smile on his face, said that he did not intend to. After all, he intends to become the representative of their faculty. Yahello raised his hand up in a showy manner and asked if they were ready. He said loudly that they needed to start the fight. Setsuna rushed forward, attacking Drago, who blocked the attack. Setsuna tried to punch him and kicked him while jumping back. He thought that Drago had blocked all of his attacks with his mana. Drago, with a confident face, thrust his fists forward with the intention of attacking him. He swung and struck. Layla, who was sitting on the bench, covered herself from the wind with her hand after the blow. She was worried about Setsuna and loudly said his name. From the fog on the battlefield, only Drago and Setsuna, who blocked the blow, were visible. The observers from the bench said that this was too much. The strangers wondered if they had really just chosen their path recently. Setsuna, with a tense face, remained in the same pose and said that if he missed even one direct blow, he would lose immediately. Drago lands a few punches on Setsuna, which he also dodges. Drago asks with an angry face why Setsuna only defends himself. Drago gets into a fighting stance and says that in the end he is still a weakling. It seems that this is all he can do. Layla wonders with horror on her face that even after all this training, Setsuna is still weaker than Drago. Yahello keeps his hands in his pockets and watches the fight with a calm expression. He thinks that at first glance it may seem like Setsuna is being pushed back, but this is unlikely. Drago very quickly lands a kick, which Setsuna blocks again. Yahello, holding a cigarette in his teeth, thought that Setsuna perfectly deflects each punch thanks to his mana counter. Drago says angrily, The same elites as Setsuna always looked down on them, the owners of the path of close combat magic, from above. He and his father were born into a family that only excelled in close combat magic. Drago took a fighting stance and asked him if Setsuna could imagine how much humiliation they had suffered until now. Drago, with an angry face, creates a sword out of magic and says that he will definitely change this attitude with his own hands. Setsuna also created a magic sword in his hand and they quickly ran towards each other with the intention of attacking. Drago swung and struck him. Setsuna dodged and jumped into the air. Drago jumped after him and, flying down, struck the ground. Setsuna remembered how they whispered behind his back that he decided to choose this direction only to stand out, and now he will learn that lesson. Setsuna covers her face with her hand and says that she understands Drago a little. They both strive to get much more than they have now. Setsuna goes around Drago and uses the skill physical enhancement, acceleration, and strikes. Drago covers his face with his hands and blocks the strike. Layla, with a satisfied face, wonders if it worked. Liano smiles and thinks that despite Drago's outstanding data, Setsuna's mana control and potential are clearly beyond compare. He became interested in finding out who will win. Setsuna, with a drop of sweat on his face, thinks that Drago has high defense, and in order to break through it, he needs to add something. Setsuna sees Drago swinging his sword and thinks that he decided to pour all his mana into this strike. Drago strikes the ground with a powerful blow, causing it to split. Setsuna turned around and realized that he was in the corner of the arena. Drago thought that he was finally able to drive Setsuna into a corner. Now he can't escape from there. Drago tensed his muscles and screamed furiously. Layla wondered what was happening to him. Setsuna stands in a fighting stance and watches as Drago runs at him with the intention of attacking. Drago throws a punch that passes through Setsuna's form. He wonders what an afterimage is. Setsuna is in the air above Drago's head and says that if you pour mana into the same place long enough, you can leave an afterimage behind for a short time. He bends his legs and swings his sword, saying that this is the end. Setsuna lunges forward, hitting Drago in the stomach. Layla watches this with a surprised look. Leano smokes a cigarette and thinks that he has decided to counterattack, using his opponent's furious onslaught to his advantage. They were both good, but now it's time to do something. Lionel takes the cigarette out of his mouth and raises his hand, saying that the battle is over. The winner is Setsuna Cromwell. The spectators react with different emotions to Lionel's words. Setsuna stands firmly on his feet and looks at Drago, who is lying on the ground. The unknown observer opens his mouth and asks, will he really be able to get back on his feet after such a blow? Drago holds his stomach and kneels down, thinking that it was not like a blow from a mana blade. He changed its structure so that it would not cause fatal wounds. Setsuna extends his hand to Drago, who is kneeling. Drago asks him to answer him one question. He bares his teeth and asks what Setsuna is fighting for. Setsuna says with a thoughtful look, so as not to lose to anyone, and so that no one takes anything away from him. Therefore, he is going to become stronger than anyone. Drago smiles and says that he really is strong. He was completely defeated. Setsuna lives up to his reputation. Setsuna looks at Drago, who is sweating, and thinks that this strength could be of great help to him in the battle against the evil god. Lionel approached them and asked a question. He himself noticed that he was losing to Drago in close combat, didn't he? He raised Setsuna's hand with a satisfied look and said loudly that he was chosen as their representative. After some time in front of the White Gate, Lionel tells Setsuna that it is time for the representatives of the different faculties to meet face to face before the competition. Lionel says that it will sound strange coming from his lips and asks him if he will behave normally. Setsuna, opening the door, answered approvingly. He closes the door behind him and looks around. The representatives of the other faculties look forward with interest. An unknown guy in glasses asks that a representative from the Faculty of Idiotic Combat has really come. He decided to voluntarily disgrace himself. He is impressed. Setsuna looked at the guy in glasses and thought that it looks like he is a representative of the Faculty of Enchantment Magic. The guy came up to him and asked what he was thinking. Does Setsuna understand what he is talking about, Mr. Representative of the Pathetic Faculty? The guy stepped on his foot and poked his finger into his chest and said that he would be his opponent in the first round. After all, everyone knows that in the last 100 years there has not been a single case of victory of the Faculty of Close Combat Magicians. They, pathetic idiots, can continue to remain on the very edge of the Academy territory and continue to pump up their muscles until they die. The guy in glasses did not finish his speech and looked ahead with horror on his face. Setsuna calmly stepped on his foot and said that it seems that the guys from the Faculty of Charms, have a very peculiar way of greeting other people. Setsuna asks that this is so, isn't it? The unknown guy looked at him with anger on his face and said that he is an idiot. Setsuna looks down on him and says that it does not matter to him whether they have won at all in the last 100 years or not. After all, this year the close combat magic faculty will win. The guy jumps back and points his finger at Setsuna, asking him not to talk nonsense. Suddenly, the principal appeared in the hall and said that there was nothing wrong with such passion, but they all needed to wait until the competition began to find out the name of the winner. All the students stood up and looked at the principal with smiles on their faces. Setsuna thought that everything was happening exactly the same as in his previous life. The principal stood in the middle of the hall and looked at all the students. The girl with pink hair said contentedly that it was a great honor for her to meet the principal. She would do her best to show what she was capable of during the competition between the faculty. Setsuna looked at the girl and thought that this was Carol from the Summoner faculty. She was still as friendly as ever. He remembered that she was a formidable opponent with whom he had a very fierce fight during the previous competition. Last time he emerged victorious, but this time too he should be on his guard. The director folded his palms and said with a satisfied face that first of all, he would like to congratulate them all on receiving the representative rights from each faculty. He was sincerely glad that 8 talented people had gathered together today. The director with a thoughtful face asked if the students had heard that the competition between the faculties would be held in the format of a one-on-one battle. All opponents were determined randomly. The first battle would be between melee magic, specializing in hand-to-hand combat, and enchantment magic, which makes it possible to pour mana into objects, thus giving them life. The second battle would be between healing magic, which works real miracles supporting its allies on the battlefield, and long-range magic that allows you to defeat your opponent without letting them get close. The third battle will be between formation magic, which fills magic arrays with various powers, and summoning magic, which allows you to command mythical beasts from other worlds. And finally, the fourth battle will be between special magic that cannot be classified, and alchemy magic, which allows you to change various substances. This competition can be considered a practical lesson in learning the magic of the various departments. The competition will begin in 10 days. Until then, decide whether you will study new magic to defeat your opponents, or focus on resting so that you can go into battle with all your might. He will look forward to seeing their fighting spirit. The students joyfully heard the headmaster's speech and bowed their heads before him. Setsuna thought that this was the only place where he could freely talk to the headmaster. He called the already departing headmaster. The headmaster turned around and said that he was, after all, a representative of the close-range magic department. Setsuna approached the principal and introduced himself, saying that he wanted to ask him something. He asked with a drop of sweat on his face that if he wins, the principal will teach him his magic? The principal looks at Setsuna and asks, he specializes in close combat, right? He doesn't think that Setsuna will be able to unfold in summoning magic. Setsuna interrupts the principal and says with a confident face that he is talking about another magic. The principal looks at him in surprise and angrily says that how does he know? He crossed his arms, shrouded in a fiery aura, and asked how does he know about it. Setsuna thought that he had terrifying mana. The principal was clearly on guard. But this second magic, hope in the fight against the evil god. And he will never be able to come back here again. Setsuna opened his mouth and said that he cannot say the reason. But the victory of a candidate from the Faculty of Close Combat Magic for the first time in 100 years will definitely change his understanding of the common sense of this world. Setsuna extended his hand and asked, isn't that what the principal himself hopes for? They stand in the same poses and exchange glances. The principal asks what Setsuna is planning? The principal, with a confident face and a smile, says that on the day Setsuna becomes the winner of the competition, he will tell him about the second magic claw. Setsuna put his hand on his heart and bowed his head, thanking him. The principal frowned and asked him not to think that it would be easy. Setsuna raised his head and said that even so, he is confident that he can do it. The principal turned the other way and said that this is the right attitude. After some time, Setsuna eats a bun while sitting on a bench and thinks that it will be good to return to school life after 10 years in such a peaceful time. This bun looks really tasty. He'll have to thank Layla for telling him about it. Setsuna sighs and says that there are 10 days left until the competition. He needs to do everything to prepare for it. Setsuna looks surprised as a large fist quickly attacks him. He, enveloped in a blue aura, blocks the blow. Setsuna jumps back and looks at the stone golem. The enchantment mage adjusted his glasses and said in surprise that he was going to hit him from his blind spot. Setsuna shakes the dust off his shoulder and wonders what he did to the golem with his magic. He asks the mage what he's doing. The enchantment mage bites his lip and says with a furious look that they will continue what they left off last time. No need to wait for the competition, pathetic idiot. He moves his hand, enveloped in a blue aura, to the side. The enchantment mage was indignant and asked how he dared to put him in such an awkward position. Setsuna got into a fighting stance and said that it was his own fault. The mage with 4 battle golems behind him looked at Setsuna in surprise. He bit his lip and scratched his head, saying that it would be unpleasant if others found out that he was bullying a pathetic idiot. The mage irritably moved his hand to the side, scattering his golems. He turned away, raised his hand as a sign of farewell and told Setsuna to prepare for their fight properly. Setsuna thought with a calm face that this mage supplies such a large amount of matter with mana and even manages to control them. He is truly talented. Setsuna sadly looked at the bun lying on the ground and wondered how one could leave so easily, dropping someone else's bun. The next day, Leano smokes a cigarette, looks at all the mages gathered and says that today they will begin preparing for the competition. Let's analyze yesterday's fight between Drago and Setsuna. He looks at them and asks if they understand what they were lacking. They both respond with approval. Leano asks Drago if he can start with him. He replies that he has lost control of his mana and his emotions. Leano asks Setsuna what he can say. He replies that he lacked basic power and was losing to Drago in pure strength. Leano says that admitting your weaknesses is the first step to growth. Then they can start improving their skills today with a small fight. Layla calls the instructor and asks if this fight will be training for the competition. Leano turns around and says with a smile that it is a good question. His opponent will be Noel from the Charms department. According to Setsuna, he is able to create several golems for both attack and defense. Since the golems have physical bodies, their fighting style will be very similar to that of melee mages. Today, he is going to give each of them a task. Drago must focus on speed. Acting as several golems, he will attack from all sides. Setsuna will have to reflect his attacks and try to counterattack. Drago, with a confident face, directs energy into his fists and says that he must prepare himself. This will not be like last time. Setsuna gets into a fighting stance and says that he is looking forward to it. He calmly stands still while Drago runs towards him very quickly. He swings his fist to attack, while Setsuna stands still with a calm look. He tilts his body to the side and dodges his opponent's first attack. Drago immediately goes to strike again, and Setsuna goes to block it and thinks that everything is fine. He notices the smile on his opponent's face and thinks that something is wrong. Drago suddenly strikes him with his other hand, but he manages to block it. Setsuna, with a drop of sweat on his face, wonders if his reaction is too slow. Leano, holding a cigarette in his teeth, says that Drago is a good boy. He has a good balance between speed and strength. He quickly leans from side to side and approaches him. Having approached the right distance, he strikes with his fist, but Setsuna dodges. He looks at his opponent and thinks that the next one will be a left hook. He notices something strange. He dodges the unexpected strike with his other hand and realizes that it was a fake. Lionel smiles and says that he made the right decision. Now he must dodge and counterattack. Setsuna heard the professor's advice, directs energy into his legs and says that he is caught. Drago strikes with his fist, and he easily dodges this attack. Setsuna, looking determined, is about to strike back. After a while, they are both lying on the ground and Drago says that it was a good fight. Lionel brings them bottles of water and says that they moved well. At this rate, in a few days he will be able to fight against 4 or 5 golems at once. Setsuna, sitting on the floor, took the bottle and said that no matter how much he trains, it will all be in vain if he weakens his defense. Lionel looked at him with pride and thought how quickly he learns. Drago knows the basics of close combat, but Setsuna has an exceptional sense. After a while, in the arena, where many people have gathered, the organizer says that the 781st competition between the faculties of the Elmridge Academy of Magic is beginning. Who of the 8 representatives will be the strongest? Setsuna and Noel enter the arena and look at each other. The organizer points to the table in his hand and asks who they will place their bet on. This can no longer even be called a bet, because close combat is too unpopular. A guy in the crowd loudly says that Setsuna should win, because he bet on him. The students turn around, notice the guy behind them, and ask, "Isn't that Akhtar from the long-range magic department?" He's so relaxed before the match. If all goes well, he'll have to face the winner of this fight. The organizer puts the microphone to his mouth and says that in this competition, the conditions for the fight change every time. And this time, it's the desert. Noel, with an evil grin on his face, tells Setsuna, who's standing there calmly, that this is great news. The audience tells Noel to smash this idiot into the sand. It's good that he's fighting a loser. Layla tells the boys that they're being too loud. Now they'll see if they're losers or not. Setsuna notices that she's screaming too loudly while Lionel tries to calm her down. The organizer lowers his hand and announces that it's time to begin the first battle. Noel shows a piece of rock in his hand and asks Setsuna if he knows what it is. He answers with a calm face that it's a copper rock. Noel throws the rock into the sand and says that's the right answer, but to be precise, that's what his golems are made of. He raises his hand and uses magic to create a golem. A large golem rises from the sand and loudly says that he doesn't need another weapon, this one is enough. He throws several copper rocks in different directions and loudly says that's why he has no chance of winning. He uses his magic to summon many golems. Layla is very surprised by what happened and loudly asks how he was able to create so many golems. Noel adjusts his glasses and says that he can create golems infinitely in this area, so he will not be able to get close to him. Two students say that the outcome of this fight has already been decided before it started. He should not have chosen close combat. Noel turns to Setsuna with an evil grin and says that if he has something to say, it would be better if he does it now. He is about to say something and gets Noel's attention with it. He calmly says that this is very boring and did not think that this would be his trump card. Noel is very angry because of this and loudly asks what he just said. He points his hand towards him and loudly orders the golems to crush him. Many golems very quickly run up to Setsuna, who calmly stands in place. Due to the battle that is happening in the arena, a large cloud of dust rises, due to which the spectators cannot see anything. Noel laughs loudly with a very satisfied face and says that now he will learn his lesson. The spectators ask in confusion what happened. Nothing can be seen because of this cloud of dust. The golems attack with their huge fists, causing dust to rise. Setsuna creates a sword of mana and cuts through the golems that are trying to attack him. He walks forward while the remains of the golems fall to the ground and says that he can cut even black steel stone. Noel is very surprised by what happened and loudly says that these golems were especially durable. He told him that he can create as many golems as he wants. Setsuna looks at the golems running towards him and says that close combat magic is the strongest magic in close combat. No matter how many golems he creates, if this is all they can do, then he will not lose. He runs very quickly between the golems and defeats each of them with one blow of his sword. Setsuna jumps on the last golem and plunges his sword into the head of this monster. Noel, with a displeased look, is about to take the stones out of the bag and loudly says that in this case the next golem will be. He does not have time to finish because he notices Setsuna, who is already swinging his fist standing in front of him. He strikes with a serious look and says that he was unlucky with his opponent. Setsuna strikes Noel in the face and because of this, his glasses fly off. From such a strong blow, he flies a couple of meters and falls to the ground. The spectators are confused and wonder what is happening there. They cannot see anything at all. The organizer says that the cloud of dust is dissipating and the winner of this fight is coming out. At the moment when the cloud of dust finally dissipated, the surprised organizer says that it was Setsuna. He looks at the defeated Noel and thinks that he was able to win the first battle. Layla, looking happy, says loudly that he was able to do it. The spectators look at what is happening in the arena in bewilderment and ask how the close combat faculty could win. How many years have passed since their last victory? One of the spectators puts his hand to his mouth and wonders in surprise if the more golems he creates, the faster he gets tired. Carol, with a drop of sweat on her face, does not understand what is happening and asks that Noel is just tired, isn't he? The students are sitting in the stands and say that in a normal situation he would not have won, so he was just lucky. Saiser strokes his beard and says that he is not tired, remembering Setsuna. The healing mage, with a smile on his face, said that Setsuna caught his attention. If everything is as he thinks, he should ensure himself. The organizer loudly says that the fierce battle continues and it is time for the second battle. Layla points to the empty seat with her palm and tells Setsuna that it was a good fight. Wouldn't he like to watch the next fight? Setsuna sits down next to her with a smile on his face and says that he wants to watch, maybe he can spy on something. He looks at Carol, who is sitting on top of a monster, and thinks that the summoning and formation departments are currently fighting. Carol, the representative of the summoning department, is currently gaining the upper hand. She is sitting on a monster that is releasing magical blows from its mouth at the enemy. The formation mage is constantly trying to get closer. He dodges the attacks with a determined look and runs forward very quickly. Setsuna holds his chin and thinks that despite the difficult situation, the formation mage's movements are incredible. Perhaps even he could do something like that. Layla watches what is happening in the arena and says that the movements of other magical directions are also very impressive. However, she still wants to become stronger in close combat magic. Setsuna looked at her and asked why she chose melee magic. After all, there are other directions. She put her hands on her knees and said with a smile on her face that a long time ago, a melee mage saved her. Layla goes into her memories and says that she was playing with her younger brother in the forest. And suddenly, they were attacked by a ferocious bear. At that moment, she thought that they were finished. However, a melee mage rushed to their aid. Since then, she has dreamed of this. She wanted to save the people around her and become stronger. Layla returns from her memories and asks with bewilderment that this is too childish, right? Setsuna looked at her with a calm expression and said that he does not think so. As long as she follows her heart, she will be able to become stronger. Layla closed her eyes and with a smile on her face says that everything is clear to her. They turn around in surprise and see Leo, who greeted Setsuna. He looks at Leo and thinks that he was the second strongest in the long-range department. He puts his hand on Setsuna's shoulder and says with a smile that he saw his first fight. He is strong even in close combat magic. He puts his hand in his pocket and looking at Layla asked, "Is this his girlfriend?" Leo raises the little finger on his right hand. Setsuna calmly asks, "What is this gesture?" Layla with a red face awkwardly answers that they are not a couple at all. She gets up from her seat, goes in the other direction and says that she is just a friend and will leave them alone. Setsuna looks at him and says that he did not expect that he would not become the representative of his department. After all, he had to defeat Akhtar. Leo lowered his head down and bends down says that it may seem like he is making excuses. But Setsuna should be wary of his dirty tricks. He fooled him and became the representative. Setsuna thought with a serious expression that Akhtar was the kind of person who would do anything to win. It seemed that he couldn't let his guard down. Several children were standing next to each other and happily discussing something. At the same time, Akhtar opened a chest with some item and looked at it with a happy smile. After some time, the organizer loudly said that it was time for the first fight of the second round, which would take place between the long-range and close-range departments. And the terrain would be a real hell, where falling would mean the end. Drago and Professor Leano were sitting on the stands with a tense look. He said that even just getting close to the enemy would be incredibly difficult here. The professor said that again, this was too advantageous terrain for the enemy. Akhtar looked at the battlefield and said that as expected from the head of the long-range department. Such a thing turned out to be a mere trifle for him. Cyrus, putting his hands on his belt, replied that he just wanted to teach Setsuna a lesson. He would make him regret his choice. Akhtar says expectantly that this is great. Now he just needs to come to the fight. The organizer holds the microphone to his mouth and says with confusion that the fight should have already started. He asks a representative of close combat to enter the arena. If he does not do this within 5 minutes, he will be awarded a technical defeat. The frightened spectators do not understand what is happening. 10 minutes ago, in the rest room, Layla put her hand on the door handle and, turning to Setsuna, said that it was her. Layla opened the door and asked him how he was feeling with a surprised face. The fight was about to start. Setsuna looked at her with a calm expression and said that he was fine. He told her not to touch that vase. It was a magical item that would activate upon contact. It would most likely suck out her mana completely. Layla asked him in surprise why he had put that on the table he was sitting at. Setsuna put his hand on his chin with a thoughtful expression and said that it was a trap that was aimed at him. The 7th one already. Layla asked him with a scared expression if he was sure that he was okay. Setsuna said that he had avoided all those traps and thought that it was all Akhtar's tricks. He was quite smart since he hadn't left any evidence. A loud sound came from the door and they paid attention to it. 3 small children entered the room, the girl in the middle holding a bouquet in her hands. She held out the bouquet and said that it was for Setsuna. Layla bent down looking at the bouquet and asked, "Is this all from them?" One of the children pointed to the corridor and said that the man asked them to give it to them. Layla thought in bewilderment that maybe it was Setsuna's admirer? Then he could have given the bouquet himself. The child answered smiling that the man said that he was too embarrassed. The girl who was holding the bouquet in her hands dropped it on the floor. She wondered what was going on. The girl grabbed her head, dark spots appeared on her neck. Setsuna looked at this in horror and thought that during the war he had seen similar spots many times. He kicked the bouquet with great force. Layla wondered what was going on. Setsuna looks at the bouquet and loudly says that this is venenum, a poisonous plant. One of the children holds Layla by the skirt and brings his fist to his mouth and starts coughing. All the children fall to the floor. Setsuna thinks with horror how they can involve children in such a thing. So, Akhtar is ready to go even so far. He clenches his teeth and says that if they do not start treatment, the damage to the body will be irreversible. He thinks that now it will be difficult to find a healer who can cope with this poison. Layla looks at Setsuna with horror and asks if it is very serious. He leans on his knee and answers approvingly that it is. He looks ahead and says that it is better for her to stay away. There is a chance that this poison can be infected simply by being near the source of infection. Layla, with a drop of sweat on her face, says that she is fine. She took the brooch in her right hand and with a serious face said that he can provide the children to her. Setsuna remembered that this is the same brooch that he helped her get back. A magical item that can accumulate mana. Layla's face was illuminated by a green light, and she said that her mother put healing mana in this brooch for her. Layla sat on her knees and closed her eyes, starting to use her magic. Setsuna looked at the child lying down and said that the spots were starting to disappear. Layla opened her eyes and with a tense face said that her mother gave her this amulet for an emergency. This emergency is happening now, right? Setsuna with a smile on his face thanked Layla. He took the bouquet in his hand and ran in the other direction saying that he needs to do this. Setsuna thought that during the blooming period, the venenum becomes the most toxic. He needs to get rid of it as soon as possible. And if he leaves it in a crowded place, the toxins will eventually infect others. Setsuna, covered in blue mana, runs up to a huge tree and thinks that if he wants to get rid of it, then he needs to go there. He throws the toxic bouquet into the air. A sword of mana appears in his hand and he cuts the bouquet with a loud shout. A green aura appears around the tree. Setsuna falls to the ground and watches this. Sometime later, in the arena, two observers are having a conversation and wondering why the representative of the close combat faculty is still not here. Maybe he ran away. The organizer with a sad look began to say that since he did not come within the allotted time, he is considered the loser, and Akhtar is the winner. The organizer, without finishing his speech, looked forward along with the audience. They saw a battered Setsuna with purple wounds. He furiously says that he did not give up and asks Akhtar to fight him. Akhtar with a smile on his face asks how Setsuna will fight in such a state. This was his gift to him for passing the first round. It seems he still accepted it, right? Taking a break from his previous attack, Setsuna says that he didn't think he would do business like this, since innocent children were harmed by his poison. Akhtar tilts his head and asks him what poison he's talking about. Setsuna clenches his fist and hears him say that he's quite hot-tempered, though. Akhtar, with a mad expression, says that those brats should be happy that they helped a true elite. Setsuna gets very angry at him and shouts his name. Raising his hand, the referee says that in that case, he'll start the second round. Setsuna raises his hand in front of him and uses the Storm Dance spell. Dodging his attack, he dashes forward towards him. Drago asks Layano what happened to Setsuna, since his mana is completely ugly. Setsuna, holding his shoulder, thinks that under the protection of the sacred tree, the venenum poison was purified, but he didn't have time to cleanse his body of it. Seeing more projectiles flying at him, he dodges them again. Akhtar continues to attack him and says that this is not all. Setsuna continues to jump and roll around the islands from all of his attacks. The referee is surprised and says that he is a close combat fighter and is now completely on the defensive. Cyrus looks at the fight mockingly and says that the preparation seems to have been worth it. He calls Setsuna's name and says that he should prepare for humiliation. Looking around the empty seats in the arena, he notices that Layla has not returned yet and hopes that the children are okay. Akhtar mocks and prepares for another spell, asking if something is bothering him. Setsuna, having caught her breath a little, continues to silently look at him, waiting for his action. The two guys say that the close combat representative is just running back and forth and think that he has little chance against the ranged mage. Akhtar continues to attack him and asks if he should just give up. Setsuna prepares to defend himself from another attack and thinks that he can hold off this attack with defensive mana. Unexpectedly for him, his mana runs out and he gets hit by his attack. Akhtar points his finger at him and laughs very loudly, saying that he really is falling apart already. Setsuna stands in the middle of a cloud of smoke and asks if he should finish him off then? Not expecting such a question, actor asks him what he is talking about. Setsuna, holding his hand, says that he should have just not allowed him to get into close combat, and just continued attacking him from a distance. But everything he did before was just a provocation. What is he planning? Actor says that he didn't expect that he would be the one lecturing him on long-range tactics. However, this is a very good point, since he is clearly not to be underestimated. He loudly tells him to look around, since he was left on a lonely pillar. Leo asks with an annoyed expression, how did this guy do that? Actor with a crazy smile says that he just sticks to the principle of avoiding unnecessary risks. After all, that was his goal from the very beginning of the fight. He raises his hand up and prepares for another spell and calls it Storm Cannon. Drago looks at this fight with an annoyed expression and grits his teeth, while Leano watches calmly. Actor, who almost finished his spell, says that this is the end. Suddenly, Layla appears in the arena. She shouts his name and says that the children are fine and shows her amulet. Setsuna smiles contentedly and sighs, saying that he does not need to worry about it now. He clenches his fist with the mark with a serious expression and says that now it is his turn. Actor looks at him with confusion and asks him how he was able to recover. Setsuna uses the mana sword and says that it is nothing special. After all, it is just a physical enhancement. All this time, while their fight was going on, he activated his cells to break down the poison. While he was busy destroying one layer of land after another, he did everything as he expected and calls him a coward. Actar, with an irritated look, loudly tells him not to be so self-confident. What can he do in such a situation? Cyrus points his finger and shouts that he says the right thing and for Actar to do it. He finished his spell and threw it towards Setsuna. He thinks that there is nowhere to run, and there is little mana left. However, for him this will be the end, and gets into a stance with the sword. Putting all his strength, he tries to reflect Actar's attack. Bleeding, he copes with this task and now the spell flies back at him. He gets very annoyed and asks how he could do such a thing. Drago continues to watch and says in surprise that Setsuna has reflected his attack. Actar screams furiously and is going to defend himself from the projectile flying at him. Putting his hands in front of him to create another storm dance, he directs it at his reflected spell. He asks with a satisfied face that Setsuna really thinks that he will not be able to nullify his own magic. He has exhausted his strategies and it is over, but before he can finish speaking, he sees Setsuna attacking him. He looks at him seriously and says that it is over for him. Did he really think that he would not be able to jump here? Actar looks at him in fear and with a trembling voice says that it is impossible. Setsuna attacks him and says that if he wants to apologize, then he should ask those children for forgiveness. Actar falls unconscious and the judge announces that Setsuna is the winner. Leano lights a cigar with satisfaction and Drago says that he did everything perfectly. He suddenly became serious and asks what is happening. The island under Setsuna begins to collapse and the spectators scream as he and Actor begin to fall. Setsuna noticed that he is unconscious and thinks that this is bad and pours her mana into his legs and grabs his leg. He cursed and does not understand how this could ever happen. Suddenly Carol summons Fenrir and helps them get out. Setsuna realizes that this is her summoning magic. The spectators rejoice and when they get out of the arena Carol strokes Fenrir and calls him a good boy. Actor is taken away on a stretcher and Setsuna is bandaged. She looks at him and says that he is one of them and that is why she thought that he could cope without her help. Setsuna says that she is wrong and really saved him. Carol from the summoning faculty is a contender for victory, and she also has a knack and even her own fighting style. If she continues to win, he will have a very difficult battle. Looking at her and her Fenrir, he goes in the other direction. The audience says that the representative of the close ones won again, and it turns out that last time it was not an accident. If everything continues like this, then it will be an unprecedented event. Sitting in his seat, the director looks at the outcome of the battle with satisfaction. Cyrus cursed, called Actor useless, and said that he will not forget this. Layla praises Setsuna, and Drago says that she told them about what happened. It was not easy for him. He asks her how the children are feeling. She said that they are currently resting in the infirmary, and the doctor said that they will recover soon. Setsuna looks at her with a happy look and says that it is a relief, but suddenly he is very scared of someone's aura. Layla looks at him with uncomprehending eyes and asks him if everything is okay with him. He replies that everything is fine, but thinks about what he just felt, like a cold wind. It was such a dark magic, filled with the intent to kill in competitions. What could it be? Some time later during training, Setsuna looks at the fist he just broke the rock with and thinks that the finals are in a week, and there is also this mysterious presence. He needs to think of something new to counter it, because the power he is looking for so much. His thoughts are interrupted by Liano, who asks what happened and why did he call him here. He looks at him and says that he wants to ask him for advice again and calls him Comet Fist Liano. He is surprised by this and says that this name brings back memories. How did he know about it? Setsuna thinks that it really was Liano and remembers the past, because this is the name he heard when he once got into the magic battalion before the regression. Comet Fist, he was rumored to be a close combat mage who could kill even the fiercest of dragons with a single blow. By the time he enlisted, he had already retired from the military, so they had never fought together. He had thought about it since they first met and asked Liano to teach him her magic. He was very surprised, putting his hand on his head and saying that it had been a long time since he was last called Comet Fist. Setsuna says that it doesn't matter, because out of all the close combat mages he had met, he is the strongest. Smoking a cigar, he asks him why he is so obsessed with strength. After all, even now he can already be called strong. Looking at his hand, he says that it is not enough, and he does not want to lose, even if his opponent is a god himself. Liano looked at him with a serious expression and said nothing, then smiled and laughed. He says that Setsuna is very interesting to him and normally he would not want to teach this technique to someone who is still growing. Liano gathered his mana into a fist and is about to use his skill. Setsuna notes that he has gathered an incredible amount of mana in his fist. Air, rocks, and the ground crumble around him. He says that this technique is why he was nicknamed the Comet Fist. It consumes too much mana, so he cannot use it that often. One hit should be enough, so he needs to watch carefully. Setsuna covers his face from the rocks that fly from the skill he used. After this, Liano was left in a crater in the ground, which was left by the power of his ability. Setsuna is very surprised by the power of the skill that Liano showed him. He says that this technique requires constant mana gathering and it is not very suitable for one-on-one tournament fights. I hope you are satisfied now? Setsuna agrees and says that he is counting on him in the future. Liano suggests starting right now and tells him to follow right behind him. After a while, Carol is drinking tea with an unknown guy, who says that he would like to congratulate her on reaching the finals. She smiles and laughs, saying that she thanks him for that. He says that her opponent will be a melee mage, but he would like to know how confident she is in her victory. Carol thought about it and answered with a smile that victory or defeat depends only on luck, but she will do her best. She gets up from her chair and takes a cup of tea, asking the guy if he wants to drink another cup of tea. He thanks her, and she takes the tea service and leaves. Suddenly he takes out a card with a mark, and because of it a sign appears on the girl's neck, after which she falls to the floor. He thinks that if she wins, then so be it, but if the situation suddenly changes, he will not leave her. After a while at training, putting out his fist, tired Setsuna asks Liano if he did it. He says in surprise that he never thought he would master it in just a week. After all, it took him 2 whole years. So he learned the Comet Fist, and now calls it a smashing bullet. Tired Setsuna looks at him with a satisfied face and clenches his fist. After a while, the arena. The judge announces that the final of the 781st competition is coming. Carol from the summoning faculty will go against the dark horse Setsuna from the melee faculty. The spectators are wondering among themselves who should win. The plump guy says that Carol is obliged to win, and the girl notes that the melee representative is also quite strong, and she even became his fan. Even the children who were lying in the infirmary came to the final and support him, saying that he should give it his all. The judge says that the final battle will take place in the ruins of the temple, and to prevent any damage that could happen during the battle, the formation mages have set up a strong barrier. Layla sits next to Liano and happily says that the terrain will finally not put him at a disadvantage. He agrees with her while smoking a cigarette, and says that he hopes that it will be like that. Setsuna looks at the headmaster and thinks that if he wins, he will have to keep his promise, he will have to teach him his second magic. Carol looks at him and says that he seems to be in a great mood. She raises her hand up and is about to summon her Fenrir and tells him that they should try their best. The judge announces the beginning of the much-anticipated final. Carol summons Fenrir, and he uses a frost attack. Setsuna thinks that it is more like a snowstorm, right? She says that she thought so about his excellent footwork, but she is not ready to give him a chance to breathe. Setsuna uses tenfold physical boost and dodges all of Fenrir's attacks and moves towards her. He jumps up to attack using a sword of mana and attacks them, hitting Fenrir. Layla looks at this in surprise and says that he did it. But Lionel tells her that she is wrong, because summoned creatures are basically just clots of mana, so such a wound will heal instantly. Pointing a hand full of mana at Fenrir, she heals him and says that he is a very strong boy. Setsuna jumps back from this, preparing for her attack. Carol says that he has done quite well so far and wonders what will happen if she does that. She raises her hand up, frosty clouds of smoke form around it, and Fenrir howls loudly. Setsuna is surprised by this and notes that the entire arena is frozen. The ice mana does not go beyond the barrier. The unknown guy says that now that everything is frozen, Fenrir's attacks should have become much more powerful. He asks with fire in his eyes what Setsuna is going to do next. Setsuna thinks about the situation, saying that besides long-range attacks, the very idea of a battle of attrition is not to his advantage. In this case, he wants to decide the outcome of this battle with his devastating bullet. He silently continues to dodge Fenrir's attacks. The spectators say that the melee representative went on the defensive and, as they expected, he will not be able to defeat the summoner. The children, looking at this, are very worried about Setsuna. Lionel watches the battle in surprise, and when Layla asks what's wrong with him, he replies that everything is fine. He thinks that after all, he needs time to prepare to use the bullet, since it is very difficult to use in a one-on-one battle. But with his outstanding mana control, he will be able to charge his hand even during a fight, although it is not that easy. Carol asks herself what he is planning. She does not want to let him do what he is planning and summons Garuda. Draco and Lionel are surprised that she summoned another creature, since it takes a lot of talent to summon them at the same time. Carol and her summons attack Setsuna. Layla is very worried about him and shouts his name. But he hits them with both hands and repels the attack, saying that she is truly an outstanding mage, and that is why he expected that she had a trump card hidden. Carol is very surprised that he was able to repel her attack. Setsuna gathers mana into a fist and is about to use a bullet, saying that it is his turn now. The unknown guy says that it is the end and snaps his fingers, activating the mark on Carol's neck. She screams very loudly in pain, purple lightning emanating from her. Setsuna is surprised and shouts her name, thinking that this magic is similar to the one used by the god in the past. Carol and her beast stop in place because of the pain she is experiencing. He looks at her and notices that this ominous mana is the same as that of the evil god, and he does not understand what is happening. She raises her hand up with a scream and summons various monsters. The audience is surprised and asks how many she summoned. Lionel hits himself on the head and says that this mana definitely does not come from her. It is worth stopping the fight now and lowering the barrier. What are the formation mages doing anyway? An unknown guy stands next to a man who has fallen to the ground and says that this barrier can only be lowered by the one who created it, so he thinks that everyone has already searched for it. And he asks this of the mage with a mark on his neck, who is unconscious. Setsuna dodges the attacks of the monsters and thinks that the owner of this mana is definitely somewhere nearby, and he only needs to track the path. The unknown guy waves his finger and asks if he really thinks that he will have time to look around in such a situation. Garuda attacks him and flies with him into a column, which breaks from the bird's strike. Setsuna screams in pain and flies back from the blow. Layla looks at this in horror and shouts his name. He sits on his knees, holding his hand, and recovers from the blow. The unknown guy smiled widely and says that even a person like him will have a very hard time tracking mana while fighting off a flock of summoned beasts. It's only a matter of time before it's all over. Lionel thinks that things are bad and Setsuna doesn't have enough time to use the killing bullet. And Carol is already at her limit. If this is not stopped soon, Carol might die from losing control of her mana. Suddenly, in the middle of the battle, she tells him to run. Setsuna calls out to her in surprise and thinks that, as he suspected, she has fallen under someone's control. She tells him with a creepy expression and tears in her eyes to run quickly before they kill him. The monsters are about to attack, and Setsuna quickly dodges their attacks and runs forward and throws a monster that was running at him over himself. The director continues to sit in his place and observes the situation in the arena. Lionel runs up the stairs and thinks that Setsuna has most likely already used up more than half of his mana. The situation is worse than ever. He needs to find the mage who erected this barrier as soon as possible so that Setsuna doesn't die in front of him. Suddenly, a monster that appeared behind him pierces his leg with its horn. Layla looks at what is happening in fear and worries about him, talking about him to the leg. The spectators asked in horror, "Isn't this too much?" Setsuna falls to the ground with his leg pierced, and the unknown man says that now he won't be able to use that technique. He moves his finger and orders the beasts to finish him off. After that, the beasts rush at him and Fenrir bites into his arm. Setsuna screams in horror from the pain. Some time ago, Lionel among the students asks them what is the most important thing for a melee mage during a fight. Drago answers that it is necessary to knock down the enemy with one powerful blow.